Erev Tov, ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me? So it's Erev Tov, Shana Tova, Shavua Tov, Gemar Chatima Tova, and that's about all I know at the moment. So I would very much like to welcome all of you here this evening, and of course the first thing I'm going to ask you is please to either turn off or mute your cell phone. The first one that'll ring will be mine, I bet.
Very good.
So I have now much pleasure in welcoming Rabbi David Woolf and thank him for spending some of his very precious time with us. I will now introduce him, but I'm going to tell you a little story before I do that. Some time ago, and not in this country, I was introducing, or supposed to introduce, a very well-known member of the community. And he was so well-known that I didn't introduce him. I thought, not necessary. So afterwards, he came over and he said, look, that's not very nice of you. I've done all this work for the community. They may know me, but you really, really ought to give me the honor, or at least the cover, to introduce me. And I've never forgotten that particular situation. So however well known Rabbi David Woolf is in this community, and he is, I'm still going to introduce him, and he'll give his lecture, and afterwards I'm sure he will be very happy to answer our questions. So, Rabbi David Woolf was born in Boston, Massachusetts, a fourth-generation American. He has over 20 years of experience in synagogue and community religious life in Queens, New York. Rabbi Woolf served as the Moreh d'Asra for the Ashkenazi Minyan hosted at the Chabad of Eastern Queens, New York. Rabbi Woolf received his smicha from Yeshivat Pirkei Shoshanim in Lakewood, New Jersey. He holds a BA in history from Boston University and a master's from the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Since making Aliyah from New York 3 years ago with his wife Paulette, he has become a sought-after Maggid Share in the community. He and Paulette have 3 children and are grandparents of twin boys. I have much pleasure in asking Rabbi David Woolf to speak to us this evening. And his subject is, well, I'm going to let him read the subject. So thank you, David.
Thank you very much. You know, let's see if it works out. You know, it really is a very important lecture series here before the Yomim HaNora'im. And I am very honored to be part of it this year and really humbled to have been asked back another year to share an idea or two with you. So I will tell you my topic, but I will tell it to you by way of a story. So I have a very dear friend in New York by the name of Elisa. I've known Elisa for probably about 20 years. We were work colleagues at different organizations, at different companies, and we've become friends. So Elisa is a Chinese evangelical Christian woman who is very active in her church. One day, Elisa and I were having lunch in a park not far from work, and she was telling me about a conversation that a group of her friends in the church were having. This particular group of friends, the church has dubbed the moms. So you get an idea of the composition of this group. So she said that the moms were trying to figure out and to answer the following question, which is our topic for tonight. They asked, how could they and their community be more like the Jews? Right, that was my response. So before I asked her, I tried to figure it out. Right, so first I thought maybe what the moms were asking were the same question that the South Koreans have asked when they said they wanted to be more like the Jews. So in truth, the South Koreans know nothing about the Jews. There is no intersection between the Jewish community and South Korea, right? They don't know our religion, our customs, our history, our language, really nothing. There is a small Chabad in Seoul, primarily to support Israeli businessmen and the odd traveler. But I am told that if you read the articles, you can wake up any South Korean at night and they will tell you this statistic, which is where the Jews represent 0.2% of the world population, we have been awarded 23% of all of the Nobel Prizes given to date, and in every category. And so they try to figure out how they can be more like the Jews. Now, it's a lecture, it's a fascinating lecture for a different time, but with the help of Marvin Tokayar, a rabbi from Great Neck who was a chaplain, a Navy chaplain stationed in Korea, he helped them to translate the Gemara, or at least pieces of it, into Korean. And it is, mothers read it to their children, right? And it is widely available. Since then, they have translated the Haggadah into Korean. And also, they have adopted Chevruta learning as part of their overall educational process. So you will see them, in photographs at least, steiging away over math or science or history. So I said, maybe that's what the moms were looking to find out. But then I said, well, maybe it's more prosaic than that. Maybe it's not a secret that when given the opportunity, we have been able to be successful from a material and wealth standpoint. So maybe that's what the moms were asking. And after all, China, especially Hong Kong, is a culture that values wealth and values material accumulation. In fact, are you familiar with Forbes magazine? Okay, Forbes magazine is a business magazine in the US. A number of years ago, they published a list of the 100 wealthiest Americans. Now, to get on this list, you needed to have at least $1 billion worth of assets, right, to your name. Now, just in full disclosure, because I don't want you coming up to me afterwards, I am not on that list. I am not only not on that list, I didn't even make the secondary, tertiary cut of that list. So I said, maybe that's what the moms were looking for. Just as an aside, the Chafetz Chaim says that our ability to amass wealth and be wealthy is not a bracha, but he says that it is actually a curse to engender the eva and the kina and the jealousy of the goyim around us. So whereas that is also not the lecture for tonight, it is worth considering. So finally I asked her, I said, okay, what does that mean? And her answer caught me by surprise. I was actually taken back. She said, the Jews are a family. The Jews take care of themselves no matter where they are, whether they know them or not, all over the world. How can we be more like that? Wow. Wow, what a profound question. What a great question. That is not only such a great question, it is a question that we should ask ourselves, especially now, as we enter into Yom HaKippurim. How can we be more like the Jews? So there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, in the 6th chapter, that lists out 48 different ways that we are koneh the Torah, that we acquire the Torah. It doesn't mean to learn the Torah. It means to integrate the values into our very being. Now, most of the items on the list, if I went around and just pointed and you said, what about this, what about that, we would get probably most of them. You have to have diligence, and you have to have humility, and you have to have yira, this sense of awe. You have to listen to our chachamim and the sages. until you get to number 33 on the list. Number 33 on the list stands out because it's not clear, number one, what it's doing on the list. It's also not clear what it means. So number 33 on this list of 48 is Noseh be'ol im chavero. Right? It translates as, right, he carries a burden with his friend. Now, most of the time, it is translated poorly, right? So we have on the announcement, it's how to be a good friend. Sometimes it's translated as carrying your friend's burden. Sometimes it's translated as empathy, sometimes rachmanut or mercy. All of these are wrong. Actually, that's not true. They're not wrong, they're incomplete, right? But we'll leave it awkward for the moment, and we'll see if we can develop a better understanding of what this midah is. And the other thing that is very clear is that without this midah, we cannot fully integrate Torah into our lives, and we fully can't actualize and be the people the Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be. So I figure with the time that we have tonight, what I would like to do is figure out how I should answer my friend Elisa so that she can go back to the moms, right, with an answer. And to do that, we have to answer 3 questions, right? Number 1, what does the expression Noseh be'ol im chavero really mean? The second is, what does it have to do with Kinyan HaTorah? And how do we do it? How do we actualize it and make it real or more real in our lives? If we can do that, then we can go a long way towards bringing meaning to our Aseret Yemei Tshuva, and we can enter into Yom HaKippurim with the proper mindset. So one of the things that makes it difficult to get our hands around what Noseh be'ol im chavero means is because, one, the words are hard to figure out, right? So when we say he carries a burden with his friend, whose burden is it? Is it my burden? Is it my friend's burden? Is it both of ours? Right? The other thing is that this is a midah that is better taught through observation, through paradigms, seeing it in action, right? One of the good parts of that is Chazal give us 2 paradigms to look at, right? And they hold them up and they say, this, if you want to be Noseh be'ol im chavero, this is who you should look for. So the first one is Moshe Rabbeinu, right? We'll save the second for a little later. So Reb Simcha Zissel of Kelm, one of our premier Musar teachers, one of our rabbis who teach us ethics, wonders why the Kadosh Baruch Hu chose Moshe to be our leader. He is not, if you think about it, an obvious choice. He didn't go through slavery. His experience was very different than the rest of Klal Yisrael. He lived in the palace, right? He was completely disconnected. If you were going to lead, if you will, a slave revolt, that's not the guy who would come to mind first, right? So the Alter of Kelm, which is another way we call Rab Simcha Zissel, says that the Torah tells us 3 stories about Moshe prior to the snare, prior to the burning bush, where the Kadosh Baruch Hu selected Moshe. So in the beginning of Shmot, it says, Vayehi bayamim hahem vayigdal Moshe. During these time, and Moshe grew up, meaning he grew up in the palace. Vayetze el echav, and he went out to his brethren. Vayira b'sivlotam, and he saw their suffering. Vayar ish mitzri makeh ish ivri me'echav. And he saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating his brother, beating a fellow Jew. Now, understanding, Moshe probably didn't know this fellow Jew, probably didn't meet him, but it was enough that he went out, right, not to rely on others to get reports, but to experience for himself. Vayifen koveko, and he looked both ways. Vayar ki ein ish vayach et hamitzri, and he looked around, and he saw that there was nobody there, and so he struck the Egyptian. Vayit menuhu bachol, and he buried him in the ground. So the Saba of Kaum says, despite the fact that Moshe was never a slave and lived a life that was very different from the rest of Klal Yisrael, he maintained his connection to our people. And the Torah keeps telling us that he doesn't refer to them as Yisraelim or Ivrim. He refers to them as Echav, right? And when your brother is in trouble or your brother is in the hospital, you don't send emissaries to see how things are doing. So the first item on the list, if you look at this story for Nosei Be'ol Im Chavero, is you have to have an awareness that we're brothers. You have to have an awareness that we're family, right? And he understood he was part of Klal Yisrael despite not being a slave, right? And the Torah tells us that he went out specifically, like I said, to see. Secondly, when he saw the Egyptian beating the Jew, he reacted. He reacted and he responded viscerally, right? Have you ever asked yourself the question, he was either in Paro's court, and there are medrashim that he was indeed Paro himself, then why didn't he just go back and change things? Because he was in the moment when he saw his brother being beaten, that he had no choice but to strike back to save his family, right? So a second instance happened immediately after. We'll just cite it and we'll talk about it in a minute. It says, Vayetze b'yom sheni, and he went out even on the second day. So this was a habitual thing he did to check on us. V'hinei shnei anashim ivrim nitzim, and he comes to see two Jews fighting. Vayomer l'rasha, and he says to the instigator, Lama takereya. It is astounding to him that Jews would fight. This was obviously before the establishment of the State of Israel. But this was amazing to him, that given the situation, that this would happen. Vayomer, and they said to him, Mi simcha le'ish sar v'shofet aleinu, who made you boss? V'hal hargeni ata omer kasher haragte et ha-Mitzri? Are you going to kill me just like you killed the Mitzri? Vayira Moshe became afraid. He said that the word was out and he escaped. Okay, we're going to save this story for a little bit later in terms of what's going on here. Now, this story is well known to us. Reb Simcha Zissel points out an interesting event that happens next. So here's Moshe, who gets involved in somebody else's quarrel, runs away, loses everything, and runs to Midian. So you would expect him to say, you would expect anybody to say, Zu mitzvah v'zu scharav. This is the reward I get for getting involved. I'm not doing that ever again. So what is the next story the Torah tells us? So the next story he tells us is with Benot Midian. He shows up at the well of Midian, there are Yitro's daughters, who he obviously doesn't know who Yitro is, and he doesn't know who his daughters are, and they're getting jostled and getting a hard time by local shepherds. So the one thing that we would do is nothing. It's not our business. They're not even Jewish. We don't need to get involved. But that's not what he does. And it is this point when he saves the Benot Yitro that the Kadosh Baruch Hu selects Moshe to be our leader and to take us out of Egypt. So how do I know that? Right? I know that because the Torah tells us that. At the Sneh, the Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, Vayomer Hashem, and God says, Ra'o ra'iti et oni ami. I saw, Vayar Moshe, I have seen the suffering of my people, like you. Asher b'Mitzrayim, that's Mitzrayim. Ve'et tza'akam, and I heard their cries. Shamati mipi nokshav ki yadati et mechoyav. Right? I felt and empathized with what they are going through. And it doesn't say in the Torah, but you can say in parentheses, like you. And Hashem was looking for somebody who could be nosei be'ol im chaveiro, like he was, to take us out of Egypt. And just as an aside, right, the Medrash tells us one other thing. So what does the Medrash tell us in terms of Moshe? How did he find the sneh? What was he looking for? He was looking for a sheep. So now we have a situation where Moshe felt empathy for his brethren, for non-Jews, and even Kol Briot Hashem, all of God's creatures. Because the Medrash tells us that he was going after a lost sheep so that they would not be harmed, that he felt empathy and needed to act for everybody. So why is this midah so important for Kinyan HaTorah? Right? Why, of all the things you could see, why is this so important? And I want to go back to the second story. It says, Vayifen ko v'ko, and Moshe looked here and there, Vayar ki ein ish. So the way I read it before, and the way we typically read it, is he looked around to make sure that there was nobody there so that he could act with impunity and he could strike the Egyptian, right? But afterwards, he encountered who we know, according to the Midrash, is Datan and Abiram, and they say, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? Obviously, there were people there. The people saw him, right? So what does it mean, Vayifen ko v'ko? He looked around. So according to Rav Simcha Zissel, he looked around to see if anybody would do something, right? The ein ish, that should ring a bell. There is a Mishnah in Avot, in the first parak, that says, Ubamakom she'ein anashim tishtadel lehiyot ish. In a place where there is no people, strive to be a person. Meaning, it's up to you to step forward. And he was looking for ein ish. To receive the Torah, we need to be a nation. We need to be united. We really need to be one. So when we talk on Shavuot, and we talk about how we were, the Torah tells us we were ki ish echad belev echad. We were one person. When Moshe encountered the Datan and Abiram fighting, he realized there was no people there. There was no empathy. There was nothing that could be done unless and until that was repaired. The only thing he could do is leave. So there's a wonderful story about Rabbi Yerucham Leibovitz. Rabbi Yerucham Leibovitz was the mashgiach of the Mir Yeshiva in Belarus. He was known as the mashgiach Ruchani. So one day, 4 students left late at night from the yeshiva to go home. The way that yeshiva students were billeted back then is they stayed in people's homes. Right now we have dorms, and it's very nice, but there they relied on people to put them up, and 3 boys stood at one place, and the 4th boy was further on into town. And as they left the yeshiva, they were accosted by the police, which is not a very simple thing, and actually was a very serious thing in Belarus at the time. And they asked for their papers. Being boys, they did not have their papers, and the police began to give them the hard time. And they said, look, we have our papers, but they are where we're staying. Come with us, and we will show you the papers. So they went to the first house where they were staying, and they showed them the papers, and the police were satisfied. And then the police went with the 4th boy to the second house. The next morning, Rabbi Yerucham called the boys together, and he told them, I am closing the yeshiva. So you can imagine the reaction. You're closing the yeshiva? He said, yeah, I'm closing the yeshiva. He explained to the boys what had happened the night before, and he said to the 3 boys, he said, how is it possible that you let your fellow student go off with the police when it is so incredibly dangerous? He said, how is that possible? He said, and I asked them, Rabbi Yerucham said, how did they sleep? They said they slept fine. He said, how is it possible that your fellow is in danger and you sleep fine? He said, if that is the case, there is no Torah being taught or learned in this yeshiva, and we should just close. So Rabbi Yisachar Frand, I don't know if you know him. He is a Maggid Shir. He's Rosh Yeshiva in Ner Yisrael in Baltimore. He told the following story about Rav Shach during the first Gulf War, when the Scuds were falling on Israel. He used to sleep during the war in a way, the way Rabbi Frand explains it, where he basically hung off the bed, right? It guaranteed that he would not get a night's sleep. So during the war, his Talmidim came to wake him up, and they said to them, you know, Rebbe, what are you doing? He was already an older man at this point. You need your sleep. He said, at the beginning of the war, the American students came to me and said their parents wanted them home, that it wasn't safe. He said, and I convinced them to stay. He said, at that moment, I caused parents across the United States to have sleepless nights, and if they're going to have sleepless nights, I'm going to have sleepless nights. So, how do we do this? Right? Rashi tells us that nosei ba'ol im chaveiro is a midah of empathy and identification. The Medrash tells us that is a midah of action, that it is insufficient simply to feel, but we must act for our brethren. And I think the reality is that you need both. So the first level is awareness and empathy, like Moshe Rabbeinu taught us. And there are really 2 different components to it, 2 different times. One is easier than the other. One is feeling empathy and awareness for people who have gone through experiences similar to the ones you have gone through. And because you have gone through it, you can feel for the other person. The second level, which is much more difficult, is feeling empathy and reaching out to people who are going through experiences that you haven't experienced at all. In fact, the Shlach HaKodesh tells us that that is part of Moshe's greatness. He had the ability to feel the slavery and the oppression, never having been part of it at all. And the Midrash tells us that Moshe used to go out to the brick pits to make bricks. So why did he do that? It wasn't because they needed the extra labor, but he needed to understand what we were going through if he was going to actually feel empathy for us. And Rabbi Osher Weiss from Bnei Brak puts it beautifully. He says, how can you say you love me if you don't know what hurts me? It is the very essence of love. So how do you do this, right? How can you achieve this kind of empathy? So they tell the story of Rav Chaim of Volozhin, who was head of the famous Volozhin yeshiva. He was also Rav of the town. So during his tenure as rabbi, the town burnt down. Not because he was rabbi, but it was concomitant to his tenure. And most of the houses of his community were affected, but not his. People were displaced, they were living in shelters, they were living in the shul. He moved out of his house, and he moved into the shul, and he slept on a bench, and he said, I am not moving back into my house, I am not going to sleep on a bed, as long as my community is suffering. Reb Shlomo Volbe, the great mashgiach of Mir, he was niftar in the 1970s. He taught a course on Musar. And part of the course on Musar was he told his students to think about somebody that they knew and think about what they needed. And it's not as easy as you might think, because what we typically do is we typically think of what we need and we project it on other people. Like my mother, Aleha Shalom, used to say, I'm cold, put on a sweater. Right? What we need to do is take the other person's perspective. There's an interesting halakha in tzedakah. And it says that when somebody's fortunes have turned, it is our responsibility to give tzedakah to return them to where they were. So if they had a car and driver, we need to provide them a car and driver so they don't feel the sting. So even things that we think are luxuries, to other people are necessities. And we have to take that perspective from the person who's going through, right, whatever happens to be going through their life. There's another idea, is that when you go through and you think about what people need, excuse me, this is for dramatic pause. Sometimes you have to take a longer term view, right? We have been saying in Slichot and all through the davening in Rosh Hashanah, we say, Kirachem av al banim, like a father has mercy on his children. Were we writing this, we would not have written that. We would have written, Kirachem aim al banim, like a mother has mercy on her children. Because we know that the merciful parent, in general, is the mother and not the father. But what David HaMelech is telling us is that the father's mercy is different than the mother's mercy. The way the Sabar Kelm describes it, it says that the mother's mercy is on the guf and the father's mercy is on the neshama. So when my oldest daughter was very young, she was 8 or 9, and she was in a football league, right? She was playing goalie. And we were watching her game, and somebody kicked the ball and it hit her in the chest, and she lost her wind, and she sat down and she started to cry. So Paulette immediately jumped up, and I immediately grabbed Paulette from the back and sat her down, right? Because the immediate thing to do was to go to her, and the longer term thing for her development was to let the coach handle it. And I know it's a trivial example, right? But it is, we need to think about what people need now and what's best for them and what they might need further down the road. And sometimes we need to look and see what people need, not physically, but spiritually. A lot of times, the harshest burdens that we carried are not physical. If you ask somebody or ask yourselves, I'm not looking for answers, what is the most painful experience in your life that you would be willing to buy back that moment? Chances are it's an embarrassment. It is a non-physical event, right? And it is those moments that we also have to consider when we reach out to our community. It's interesting that this idea of hakarat hazulat, the identification of other, is, according to our rabbis, hard-coded into us not as Jews but as a species. That the Kadosh Baruch Hu planted this in us at our creation. And there's an interesting idea that when it says lo tov heyot adam levado, it is not good for man to be alone. They say that what the Torah should have said is lo tov levad. They shouldn't be alone now. But what they're telling us is it means they shouldn't be alone ever. Meaning that man's existence is predicated on being able to look after people and having people look after them. So Reb Chaim of Volozhin put it beautifully, so pardon me, I'm just going to read it. It says, this is the entirety of man. Not for himself was man created, but instead to help others to the extent of his ability to do so. And just as an aside, with these types of discussions about Nosei Ba'ol Im Chaveiro, we typically concentrate on the difficult parts of our lives. But the truth is, it's also true about smachot, right? We have an obligation to participate in each other's smachot as if they were our own. So they tell the wonderful story about Rav Pam, who was Rosh Yeshiva of Zatzal, who was Rosh Yeshiva of Torah Badas, in New York. So he would make it his business to go to every wedding he was invited to and to celebrate it as if it were his own. So one year he was in Avelut, and he still would go to every wedding beforehand to meet with the Chassan Kala and to wish them Mazel Tov, etc. And his Talmidim came to him and said, what are you doing? People will understand you're in Avelut. You don't have to go. And he says, yeah, it's true, I don't have to go. He says, for me, going to these smachot are really a nightly and sometimes a multiple of times a night. He said, but for this Chassan and Kala, it's a once in a lifetime event, and I need to share in their simcha. So we mentioned before that there are two parts to Nosei Ol Im Chaveiro. One was empathy, and the Medrash tells us that the other is action. So what actions should we take to deepen this midah and integrate it into our behaviors and into our souls? So certainly it begins with awareness and attitude, right? So there's a very famous story of Rav Hutner. So Rav Hutner once went with his wife to the podiatrist. His wife was having troubles with her feet. And he said to the doctor, "Our foot hurts." Right? Opening our eyes and looking around and seeing what's going on. Who have we not seen in a while? Who is missing? Right? What might be going on? Checking in to find out just what they feel. And sometimes all it takes is a kind word. Mishlei tells us, it says, Daga belev adam yashchena. Depression and worry is debilitating. V'davar tov yisamchena. And a simple, kind word elevates and joys. So maybe the first step is simply a kind word, an inquiry. The second thing we can do is we can pray. We're very good, and we are, at praying when somebody is sick. But tzorchei amcha rabim, the needs of our people are many, and we have lots of opportunities to pray. Prayer helps and prayer works. The Gemara tells us, actually, there's a discussion about whether prayer should be silent or not. And they say that prayer for your sins should be silent, for your suffering should be aloud. Why? Because if you pray aloud, people will help you. And recovery is a function of the community and a community event. The Gemara also tells us that one who has the opportunity to pray for his fellow and does not is a choter, right? And it goes as far that says that a Talmid Chacham, here meaning somebody who is aware and Torah aware, if he hears that somebody is suffering and he doesn't become physically ill, right? He is a choter, right? That should be the level of our understanding. The next thing we need to do is we need to do our homework, right? So my rabbi in New York, Rabbi Menachem Penner, used to say that the most useless offer of help is when you say, if there's anything I can do, please call me. Anything at all. That is a guarantee the phone will never ring, right? So what you have to do, so I'll tell you another story. So we had a friend in Queens, actually on the island, who was going through chemotherapy and needed to have chemotherapy twice a week. So Paulette, when she heard it, said, I've got time, I'm gonna call and tell her if she ever needs a ride, she should call me. I said, well, if you offer like that, the phone will never ring. What you have to say is, I understand you need a ride Monday and Thursday, or Thursday, which is better, Monday or Thursday? And she did. She came back, she goes, that's not necessary. And she said, yeah, that's true, but that's not what I asked. Monday or Thursday. And she drove her the entire summer while she was going through treatment, right, one of the days. So we have to be very, very, very specific, and we have to do our homework. So at the beginning of the Mishnah, we quoted, at the beginning of this year, we quoted the Mishnah in Avot, saying that nosei ba'ol im chaveiro is critical into integrating Torah into our being and into our lives. And we said that one of the paradigms that we have is the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We have a mitzvah that is called Lalechet Bidrachav, to walk in his way. Imitatio or imitatio Dei, imitating God. So why is it that he cares? So one of the things that the Kadosh Baruch Hu wants from us is he wants us to grow spiritually, right? And the more we look outside of ourselves to others and to helping others, the more we raise ourselves spiritually and the closer we get to the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And as we enter into Yom HaKippurim, Rabotai, this is the trajectory we need to be on. So we are charged with being Mamlechet Kohanim Vegoy Kadosh, to being a holy nation, to being a nation that truly integrates the values and principles of our Torah into our very being. We are at a time of year where we are challenged to look at ourselves and to see if we truly are living up to the ideals that we espouse. In a couple of days, we will be standing in Shul davening to the Kodesh Baruch Hu to be gracious to us for the coming year. Let us convince him that this year we are going to be more like the Jews. Gmar Tov. We have time for questions if you like. No.
Does your talk allude to the fact that you say the aTames in the plural?
It has everything. So the question is, does it have anything to do with the fact that we say the al-chaitz in the plural? So I would say yes, but don't stop there. It has everything to say that we say everything in the plural. Right? All our tefillah is as a people.
What did your friend make of your answer?
I'm not sure. It's a good question, I'm not sure. So maybe what I'll do is I'll ask her to watch the video.
Are there commentaries on why Moshe looked either way and saw that there was nobody who was taking leadership before he decided to hit the Egyptians? Because he clearly took a moment to consider what to do rather than react instinctively.
I have not come across anything, but if I were going to venture my guess, is he showed up, he saw the situation, and he wanted to know what was going on. He wanted to see if somebody was going to step up, right? So I don't think he held back, but I think he came in and was probably quite surprised that he had to act. Teresa? Oh.
It wasn't
George?
a question, it was just a comment.
Okay.
That I was in North Carolina in company of non-Jewish people who were so envious of the fact that the Jewish people are a family, that how do they make their church something like ours? How can they emulate us? They are all single people on their own. They are not integrated like the Jews.
Send them to the video. Vivian.
You spoke so beautifully. Thank you. A timely reminder for all of us at this time of year. It's something that I try to do, and I know I fail miserably at all too often. But one of the things I see amongst the people who achieve a huge amount in this field is that they put themselves in a situation where actually they make themselves ill trying to help other people. And I find that very distressing, because if we're trying to emulate and reach this madrega, this particular point, how much, because we're told we have to take care of ourselves. We're told we have to physically take care of ourselves, mentally take care of ourselves. How far do we have to go down the journey in taking care of others that actually disadvantages us?
So I'll answer it from this perspective. There is a limit, a percentage limit of the amount of tzedakah you can give. You're not allowed to impoverish yourself to help other people. right? So yes, I would say that there's a balance. I'm not sure that we're all at that tipping point quite yet, but I would agree. But obviously, there's a balance.
Isn't that also shown in, there's a Mishnah, I think, in which two people are in a desert and there's only enough water for one, and you need
much longer conversation. It's in Masechet Bava Metzia, and maybe Tisha B'Av will do that.
All right.
There's a lot of barriers to what you're professing that we should be doing, and some people are much better at doing what you're suggesting than others. Others start from a much lower point. So how would you sort of suggest someone who, let's say, is more introvert or is doesn't have the time, let's say, these are all, I would say, the barriers, how do you say they should start getting that sort of, doing those actions you're talking about?
Certainly it helps to pay attention and be aware, right? That's kind of the base level. Saying a kind word to somebody doesn't take time and, right, doesn't cost anything. And certainly tefillah, certainly tefillah, we have the time and we can take the time to keep each other in mind. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm sure I speak for many people, certainly in Young Israel Shul, and I'm quite sure it's the same thing here in the McDonald's International. Although I think that Young Israel have a larger number of older people than in McDonald's.
Oh, yeah.
However,
Maybe not.
am I right or wrong?
I'm sorry, Mervyn, was that a question?
Well, that's a question, it's a statement. And one of the blessings, and I really mean blessings, of being in a community such as ours, and I'm including Young McDonald's here, is that there are so many people who are, because they're all getting older, are in greater need of help from the community. And what is the most wonderful thing is that regardless of the age of those who are coming forward, there seems to be no shortage of willing men and women who come forward and say, here we are, not what can we do for you, we're here to help you in many ways. And I think I've never seen a community such as that in the ones that we're following. And we have the opportunity, and Baruch Hashem, while we still have health and able to do things, we have more opportunities to help others than ever before.
I think that's true. That's been certainly my experience, my observation in this greater community. Okay, well, Gemar Tov, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Okay.
Don't go too far.
Okay, I'm just going to go there.
So,
Microphone, David.
oh yes.
Sorry.
It's on a different madriga. True, I mean that. So, without in any way trying to emulate any of the stories or any of the other things that you demonstrated to us this evening, I'm sure that on behalf of everyone here this evening, they would like to give you a very big shkach for a most interesting and it was a pleasant lecture. It was helpful. It was giving us a feeling of doing nice things in a nice way, and I think that gives most people here, certainly, especially after what Mervyn has said, that feeling as well. So thank you very much indeed for a very interesting address, and the only thing left for me to do, as we always do for lecturers, is to make a small presentation to you. So if you would like to come forward now, without dropping this mic, I would like to present you with this certificate by the McDonald International Shul, with grateful thanks to Rabbi David Woolf, in appreciation for his lecture of Nosei Ba'ol Im Chavero, this year, let's be more like the Jews. And this is signed by Jeremy Rosenstein, our chairman, October 2019, and we're nearly at the end of the year. So I wish you well. Only good things, please God.